Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs show. The difference here on this program is that if we think something, we say it. At other outlets, of course, if they've got thoughts, there's a long list of things they can't say, a long list of things that are regarded as politically incorrect, things that can't be delivered in terms of truthful information to the Australian people. We've got no inhibitions of that kind here at Mark Latham's Outsiders, and we've got a great show coming up, so much to discuss. We've got the Human Rights Commission, some astounding news about Gillian Triggs. We've got a waste of money in the domestic violence budget in Victoria, a waste of money with schools funding at a federal level. We've got information about Hillary Clinton, North Korea. I'm going to talk to Dane Van Der Neut later on, who's from the commercial fishers section in New South Wales, the association. I think it's very important here on Mark Latham's Outsiders to have some real life stories of how government is holding back economic development, how Australia is not fulfilling its real potential. We import 72% of our seafood for consumption in Australia. And Dane's going to talk about all the government restrictions holding back the commercial fishery section. And then a special treat towards the end of the show. Anyone who's a listener of the Alan Jones, the very popular Alan Jones radio program on 2GB will know the voice of Barbara, that wonderful character from country Victoria with lots of views on all the issues. She'll be talking to us towards the end of the program. You've got to stick around for Barbara. She's an absolute legend, an absolute gem. But right now, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Stacey Cousins, who's joining us from the Menzies Research Centre and a star writer at the Spectator Australia. Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you for having me.
And James Morrow.
Former Menzies, actually. Unfortunately, my contract finished up, but I had a wonderful time and I learnt a lot.
Well, they should renew that. The schools, if they don't. And James Morrow, my editor at the Daily Telegraph. It's a great honour to welcome you here. Thank you for the great job you do at the Telly, which is the leading newspaper in Sydney, if not the country. And welcome to Mark Latham's Outsiders.
Great to be here, Mark. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, viewers. Thank you for your participation in the show. We've got some viewer questions as we go along. And also, can I just point out our various websites? We do need funding support. We haven't got a $1 billion budget like the ABC. We're up against the giant of public funding broadcasting in Australia, the ABC. We rely on your support. You can kick a few dollars in to help us along the way. You can do that at support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. That's the support page address, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. And for all the people who've been asking for the YouTube and the podcasting of this show, watch it later on. Watch it 2 or 3 times. If you're watching it right now, why not? Go for it. Then we've got, hopefully first thing tomorrow morning, the YouTube will have uploaded this particular episode for people to watch on replay. Spread that word. And also for the convenience of podcasting. You can get those things off the website, www.marklathamsoutsiders.com. So the 3 W's.marklathamsoutsiders.com. You can see the address there to get all the good information. It's not just this show, but the video editorials, the great contributors we have in Bettina Arndt and Corinne Barraclough. They've got some important stuff tomorrow coming out in the argument about domestic violence and also the exaggeration of statistics by some of the left feminists. So they're great contributors. My Telegraph columns are there, courtesy of James. So lots of information on the website and lots of things to get through tonight. We're going to start with the breaking news that makes you think, so many people say, Australia, things have gone crazy, the world's gone crazy. Well, here's the news that Gillian Triggs has been awarded a Freedom Prize, the Freedom of Speech Voltaire Prize, by a mob called Liberty Victoria. There's nothing liberty or libertarian about them if they're giving out a free speech award to Gillian Triggs. This is someone who's persecuted students at the Queensland University of Technology. Under 18C persecuted Bill Leake. He was driven to an early grave, and of course she made that infamous comment that sadly you can't control what people are saying around the kitchen table. Daisy, how's this woman won a Freedom of Speech Prize?
I think it might be a joke.
No, we've got the evidence. The Guardian newspaper has reported this. Have we got the screenshot there? There it is, The Guardian. They get the left-wing scoops. I know it's satire, I know it's irony to us, but they are fair dinkum giving out this Freedom of Speech Award to Gillian Triggs, the outgoing head of the Human Rights Commission.
No, after you.
After you. I mean, the only thing, it is a speechless sort of thing. The only thing you can really say to this is that satire is dead. I mean, if you're giving not only a Freedom of Speech Award, but a Freedom of Speech Award named after Voltaire, who apocryphally, we don't know that he actually said it, but who's known for that saying that I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And we're giving it to Gillian Triggs, who has stood up for every restriction on freedom of speech in this country, as you said, chillingly said, it is a shame that you can say what you want around your kitchen table. The interesting thing about that is that the prepared speech was that she gave in Hobart to the Bob Brown address. She said, the text read that she was to read was, you can still say what you want around the kitchen table. She ad-libbed that bit about it's a shame that you can say that. So what was it? That's really what she's thinking. That is her actual belief, that it is a shame that you can say what you want around the kitchen table. Now that is Maoist. That is Stalinist. This is back to the idea that children should report their parents for thought crimes, for hate crimes, for whatever crimes against, humanity that we're now saying are now illegal to say. Kids should go into the schools and say, my daddy said climate change might not be real. Who knows what's going to happen next? It is an insane Maoist position, and for her to get a freedom of speech award, I think it's bizarre.
You're suggesting a Stalin award would be more appropriate. We strike the Stalin medal for Gillian Triggs.
A Star of Lenin, an Order of Lenin, something like that. But it is absolutely nothing to do with Voltaire. It is absolutely nothing to do with Enlightenment values, which Voltaire is all about. It is nothing to do with the idea of freedom of speech. As you say, Bill Leak was hounded by this women's organization. QUT students were hounded, and the other thing is that everybody saw them. It was very public and done publicly for a reason, as a warning. Say, there's a line here, but you're going to want to stay well clear of that. And it was those campaigns, I think, did so much damage to civil society, and that's how you wind up, I think, with very extremist positions on all sides, because when you say you can't have moderate discussions about things, people will then go to the extremes.
Well, it is a travesty. Daisy, I wish it was a joke, this award, but she is going to receive it. But there was other news during the week about the social engineering, the dictatorial tendencies of the Human Rights Commission when the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, had the proposition that you needed to have a certain quota of women working for a company before you could win contracts with the federal government. Now, you can't possibly be in favour of quotas. Don't you think it's a bit demeaning for women to have a quota system?
It is absolutely demeaning for women to have a quota system. I've said this till I'm blue in the face. It is demeaning, it is patronising. And aside from anything else, I don't think women need quotas to get into positions of power. They don't need them to get onto boards. The reason there are less women in positions of power and on boards is because women often have different priorities. They like to go and have children. There is nothing wrong with that. Now, the narrative that third wave feminists, for instance, will push here is that somehow women who choose to do that are socialized or unduly influenced by some weird mystical force called the patriarchy, whatever that is, which I think is incredibly misogynistic, and it's a misogyny pushed by women, that somehow women who choose to stay at home with children are weak or easily influenced or can't think for themselves. And again, it's that sort of far leftist groupthink, when I have faith that women are thinking, feeling, autonomous human beings, and if they choose to push their way through the workforce, they've done that at their own free will, and if not, they don't.
History tells us that quotas can be a very dangerous concept, because in this example, for women in Australia, you could argue that women are massively overrepresented in the teaching profession, women are massively overrepresented in the nursing profession, and increasingly are overrepresented in the legal profession. I mean, you can go to legal workplaces now, public and private sector, where it's, spot the man exercise. So it's very counterproductive, I think, when women are making so much progress in areas like the law, to then have a so-called sex discrimination commissioner putting forward a quota idea, which may lead to some men saying, hang on, I work in a legal firm or a public sector legal organisation where there's 30 lawyers, I'm one of 3 men, how about we kick out a dozen so of the women to even out the male-female representation? Isn't this just an own goal, James?
It's a complete own goal. And again, it's one of these things where when you try and engineer an outcome in society, whether it's what people are allowed to say and think or what jobs they wind up doing, everybody suffers. You're going to wind up with a situation where you're not hiring people for their merits. You're hiring them firstly on the basis of what gender they are. So you're going to have mismatches in qualifications. You're going to wind up feeding all sorts of resentments. You're going to wind up feeding more and more tensions within workplaces, within society. You're going to hurt businesses that would otherwise be able to get contracts. And of course, what happens with every time there's friction here? Then you need more and more bureaucracies and laws and regulations to sort that out, to work them through. And it winds up becoming this self-fulfilling prophecy where you need more and more bureaucracies and more agencies, more and more regulations to then fix all the problems of the society that you've tried to engineer perfectly. And so you endlessly chase a utopia that you can never achieve.
Yeah, and it's anti-freedom because Tim Soutphommasane, the Race Discrimination Commission, has come up with the idea of racial quotas, saying that if the general population has 10% Asians, then a law firm has got to have 10% Asians. But what if Asians don't want to be lawyers? You know, the Asian families I know, they've got aspirations for their children to be doctors, engineers, scientists, mathematicians. So it's this social engineering paradigm, it's anti-freedom. It doesn't give people the freedom to choose the professions that they want for themselves. It's regulated where 10% ethnic group in the general population, 10% in a particular workplace. Now, I'm very worried about where the Human Rights Commission is headed. It's not just Gillian Triggs, it's also Jenkins, it's also Soutphommasane. And this organisation has got way beyond its original charter. It was set up in the 70s. Whitlam had some legislation. Fraser set it up, where really it was to be a reactive organisation. If people made legitimate complaints about race discrimination or sex discrimination, the Commission would deal with it, maybe through mediation, maybe through some sort of judicial process in the extreme. But now this outfit has become very proactive in trying to mould Australian society, particularly through the corporate sector, according to its image of what Australia should be. It's becoming an alternative government, an alternative political party that's exercising power that's undemocratic. None of these people have been elected by anyone. I haven't picked Jenkins or Soutphommasane to be anything. None of us have. It was done by government appointment, and they're getting way out of control trying to mould society effectively in their image. Don't you think this is a very dangerous aspect for our democracy, to have these unelected people exercising such proactive power?
Oh, absolutely. It's because, and you know, essentially what you kind of have is this group that acts almost like the nation's HR department, the nation's human resources department.
That's it.
To you know, enforce the quotas, have the diversity training, and be this kind of dead weight on society, on businesses, and that everybody always knows, oh, can't really say that, can't really do that. You know, things that aren't necessarily, you know, bad or awful or racist or sexist. And it's all predicated, you know, remember, on this kind of idea that Australians are so racist and so sexist that they need this whole big bureaucracy to intermediate their interactions. And it's a very anti-freedom thing.
Yeah, you can't trust the people.
You can't trust the people.
You can't trust
the people. And because you can't trust the people, you need this whole group of bureaucrats and unelected officials and rules and regulations to decide how we interact with one another as Australians.
It also sort of necessarily assumes that all human beings are exactly the same, that everyone of each, you know, ethnic, gender group, it's the identity politics thing, that all of them think exactly the same and want the same things. And that's just not true. You know, as I was saying before, human beings are autonomous. We are all different. We all have different interests. So this weird social engineering experiment that's going on is anti-human. Aside, not just anti-freedom, it's anti-human, and it's a worry.
Well, here at Mark Latham's Outsiders, we've got further evidence here of how the Human Rights Commission is acting as an unelected, unaccountable alternative government trying to mould our society. Tim Soutphommasane at Race Relations Commission has just put out a video about his Diversity Council, a group to implement the racial quotas. Let's have a look about how he talks about Australian leadership. It's very instructive. Let's listen how they talk about leadership and what they think they want for our country.
Do we have leadership that's fit for a country where almost half the population is either first or second generation Australian?
The Leadership Council on Cultural Diversity was actually put together after an Australian Human Rights Commission report was released last year. It basically found an extreme lack of diversity in leadership positions.
It brings together 8 leaders in business, in government, in media, in higher education to become more visible and prominent advocates on cultural diversity. If we are honest about talking on cultural diversity, we must be frank about the presence of bias and discrimination and the role they play. It is about starting a conversation, and I hope that all of you here tonight will join the conversation.
Seeing diverse leaders is one important part for people understanding no matter what background I come from, no matter what clothes I've got to wear today or tomorrow, no matter what gender I am, I can get there.
1 in 4 Australians are born overseas. But I had no living experience of that, and I definitely didn't have that representation reflected back at me.
there's not that diversity that young Aboriginal people have to look up to.
Diversity is not just a gender issue, it's not just a cultural issue, it's not just a sexual orientation issue. It's accepting different.
You see how they speak about leadership, like it's their preserve to mould Australian leadership according to what they want. Well, we've elected a parliament. We've elected a House of Representatives and a Senate in Canberra to make decisions about leadership. Who's Sue Fomasan to talk about whether people are fit for leadership and to introduce a system of racial quotas? He's going door to door in the Sydney CBD and other places to sign up these jokers for this particular outcome. As you say, James, acting as the HR department for the nation when it's way outside their charter.
Completely. And if you think about it, they claim to want diversity. They claim to want a diverse society with, all genders and all races represented. But if you think about it, the end goal that they really want is something that's very, very homogenous and dull.
No diversity of opinion.
Exactly, no diversity of thought, and that's characteristic of the left. They don't like diversity of opinion. They value every other kind of diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity,
even
sexuality.
Diversity.
Even racial diversity. I know many different types of race.
She's a lot of fun.
She knows, I know it too. No, but they do. The only thing they don't value in terms of diversity is diversity of opinion and diversity of thought.
And same in the domestic violence debate, where everyone is supposed to follow the Rosie Batty patriarchy line. Now, Daisy, you've been having a look at the Victorian state budget, where they're spending, believe it or not, $1.9 billion on so-called domestic violence programs. I mean, it's out of control, isn't it?
It's a $2 billion narrative, is how you describe. What's been pushed is this very strange feminist narrative about domestic violence, which has three parts. The first part of the narrative they push is that we have an absolute epidemic of domestic violence in Australian society. The second part they push is that it's absolutely primarily men beating women. And the third part of the narrative is that it's a heterosexual issue. Now, the first part of the narrative, that it's a huge epidemic, we have this culture of violence and misogyny, is totally false, demonstrably false. If you look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the most recent data, for instance, revealed that it's only 1.06% of women who are actually affected by domestic violence per year, which is too high. Still too high. We wish it was zero, but it's not, as we're led to believe, every second household.
It's not an epidemic.
It's absolutely not an epidemic, and it's damaging to push the narrative that it is, because it just creates a sort of neurosis and a strange divide between the sexes. Now, the second part of the narrative, that it's primarily men beating women, yes, it is more women in heterosexual relationships that suffer, and you look at any data, it's about 1 in 3. But men are 1 in 4. Not that far behind women, and as we know, men are probably less likely to come out about it because of that terrible shame and stigma associated with being beaten by a woman. They're also less likely to be believed. So the numbers are very, very close. Now, the third part, that it's mainly a heterosexual narrative, now there's some very interesting data on that from the Centre for Disease and Crime Prevention in America. Similar data to Australia in terms of women in heterosexual relationships being beaten. It's about 35%, men 29%. But if you look at LGBT relationships, for instance, male same-sex relationships have the lowest lifetime victimization rate at 26%. I know, interesting. So men as sort of violent monsters sort of debunks that narrative a bit. Now, this is interesting. If you look at same-sex female relationships, 43% lifetime victimization rate. Very, very interesting.
Well, that makes patriarchy sound silly. If the idea is that men have a natural disposition towards this kind of violence, you're saying
totally
in that control group, the women are worse.
Absolutely, and it's not only that, the highest of all of them, bisexual women, 61% lifetime victimization rate of domestic violence. You don't hear boo about any of that from the feminists, because all that reveals is if you go percentage-wise, the more violent gender in relationships actually isn't men, it's women. But no one wants to hear that. And for a group of people, for third-wave feminists who claim to be so inclusive of LGBT people and LGBT relationships, for them to not address, to deliberately push aside the obviously quite dire situation of domestic violence in same-sex female relationships is terribly hypocritical.
You mentioned they're third-wave feminists. Now, this is something that we need to understand. Can you just give the viewers a brief outline of the difference between the first way, the second way and the third way feminism? We hear this in the debate. What does it mean in detail?
Absolutely. Well, there are three waves of feminism, three main waves. The first wave was the early 20th century, and that was the suffragettes and getting the vote. Great. Perfectly reasonable demand. We got that. Excellent. The second wave was sort of the mid to late 20th century, and that was all to do with equality of opportunity, so equal access to the workplace, equal pay, equal access to education and universities. Awesome, great, totally reasonable demands. Everyone could get behind that. Now, this little era, however, was when the sort of radical elements of feminism started poking through, which we see more of today. And they had a particular problem with this idea of femininity, so stereotypical girliness, because they believed that it was a tool created by the patriarchy in order to control women, which I would heavily dispute.
Right, so they're after outcomes.
And that's the internalized misogyny.
Oh,
and all
yes.
Of, right? Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely.
So they're after outcomes rather than equality of opportunity. The second wave was about equality of opportunity.
And then
now they're trying, this is a social engineering push now to get certain outcomes.
And then you move on to, you move on to third wave feminism. Now that was sort of, I think, about the early 2000s. Originally it was perfectly reasonable. It was about changing attitudes and semantics to women, women in the media, women in the workplace, etc. But then all those things started being addressed. So, gender disparity in the workplace, tick, addressed. More women in film and television, tick, different representation of women. These are good things. All of these things are being addressed, which meant that the feminist leaders started running out of things to complain about, and their arguments ceased to be groundbreaking. So they started making things up. They started making up words like mansplaining, for instance. I don't know if you're familiar with the term manspreading.
Yeah, Tanya Plibersek say it once.
Oh, yeah. No, I think she said...
I wasn't encouraged.
No, she said mansplaining. She said mansplaining.
Oh, okay.
That's the other one, which is where allegedly if a man explains something to you, it's inherently patronizing. I don't have that experience.
That all sounds like...
I'm not sure actually that you've quite articulated that properly.
Oh, you man-interrupted me, Angie. That's another Angie mansplain.
Well, speaking of women, speaking of left-wing feminist women, we've had some news, James. You're regarded as our foreign policy expert. As Donald Trump might say, you're a very smart cookie. And we've got the news that Hillary Clinton has spoken in the last 24 hours about the reason why she lost the US election. We've got a clip. Let's listen to Hillary.
It wasn't a perfect campaign. There is no such thing. But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off. And the evidence for that intervening event is, I think, compelling, persuasive, and so we overcame a lot in the campaign. We overcame an enormous barrage of negativity, of false equivalency, and so much else. But as Nate Silver, who doesn't work for me, he's an independent analyst, but one considered to be very reliable, has concluded, if the election had been on October 27th, I'd be your president.
Were you a victim of misogyny? And why do you think you lost the majority of the white female vote?
Just to give you a tiny little preview, yes, I do think it played a role. I think other things did as well. Every day that goes by, we learn more about some of the unprecedented interference, including from a foreign power whose leader is not a member of my fan club. And so I think it is real. It is very much a part of the landscape politically and socially and economically.
Well, what do you reckon? Is that the world's greatest whinge? Or what?
Say what you will. Say what you will, Mark, about Donald Trump. I know he's not everyone's ideal candidate. I know that there's a lot of concerns around his presidency, but doesn't that just underline what a bullet the world dodged in not electing Hillary Clinton? I mean, did you listen to that? It was the Russians. It was Jim Comey. It was the FBI. It was misogyny. The wind was blowing. The sun was in my eyes. is there anything that she won't blame her loss on? Now, I just read a fascinating book called Shattered. It's by a couple of Washington journalists. I highly recommend this book. It lays out in great detail how basically the defeat of the Clinton campaign was baked into the cake from the very beginning. It goes back to 2008. You know, after she lost that race, she decided, I'm not to blame for this, my staffers are. So she combed through all of her staffers' emails to find who was leaking to the press.
Really?
She rated every Democrat in Congress from 1 to 7 to determine how loyal they were and punished those who weren't loyal enough. The polls all were telling her that there's trouble, but she ran a data-driven strategy that only got the base riled up, and therefore all of the people that she ignored, who were white working-class people who voted twice for Obama, decided, I'm being ignored this time. So, you know, they would have, if they voted for the first black president, they probably would have been open to voting for the first woman president.
Her whole strategy really was to say that vote for me because I'm female, vote for me because it's my turn. Bill and Barry Obama, the black Jesus, have had turns, make me president. And I'm not Donald Trump. So she actually offered nothing to working class male communities in particular. People restructured out of jobs. She called them deplorable. And it got to the point where white women didn't vote for her, and a majority of American women, just like her, married white women, overwhelmingly supported Trump. So when people like you don't vote for you, well, maybe you should blame yourself instead of misogyny.
Well, exactly. I mean, just two very quick things. You know, the alarm bells were ringing in the campaign, but the way this campaign was structured, everybody couldn't get access to her, and people were afraid to say that anything was wrong, lest they be judged as disloyal. And so the whole thing was a schmaltz.
She didn't even visit some of the states she lost. The key states.
She didn't go to Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. She didn't even go there. How about blaming a campaign schedule?
I think what also needs to be pointed out, if you look at Hillary Clinton's style of campaign, she used Katy Perry and Beyonce and Miley Cyrus. And not Kanye, but Jay-Z. Kanye came out for Trump, which is very exciting. But, you know, she used all of this star power because that's how out of touch she is. She thought that would appeal to the ordinary American voter.
She was trying to prove that she was an elite, and she did prove it.
And she did extremely
and the
well.
public responded accordingly.
Well. If you work in a coal mine or something for 16 hours a day, are you going to care about Beyonce dressed in a pantsuit to mimic Hillary Clinton's? I don't think so.
We've got a viewer's question to you, James, from Adam Francis. Wasn't Clinton's big credibility problem the email scandal, again, for which she herself is to blame?
Well, look, she was completely to blame for that. She set up the server after 2008 when she became Secretary of State because she was so afraid of having emails leaked and because she was afraid of freedom of information requests. So it was always about secrecy for Hillary Clinton. So it was that secrecy that led her to set up the emails. But the whole idea that, you know, the Russians somehow influenced or interfered with the election, that's a very tendentious thing. You know, WikiLeaks released John Podesta's email. John Podesta was a campaign guru who fell for a password reset scam. So, you know, real great genius here. His emails were very banal, and really no one actually explores the idea that actually didn't the Russians more likely think that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and what they were probably doing was hacking her emails to try and gather up a bunch of information so that they would have compromise or compromising information on her when she actually became president. I think that that's probably the more likely result than them actually trying to, you know, steer the electorate towards Donald Trump for whatever reason.
Now, some of the viewers are also asking about the situation in North Korea. It hasn't been in the news big time over the past week, but James, what's happening there, and what's your outlook for the likely scenario in coming months?
Well, I mean, the North Korea situation is always really, really worrisome, and it gets more and more worrisome. We've seen a couple of failed missile tests, which may be, there's a lot of speculation that these were somehow jammed or hacked by U.S. or other intelligence services that were able to electronically jam them. We've seen U.S. Bomber Command fly a couple of bombers across the South Korean bit of the peninsula as a kind of a show of force. We've seen the installation of a high-altitude area defense system, missile defense system in South Korea now, which is starting to make the Chinese a bit nervous because if the military starts to ramp up there in preparation for something. The really interesting thing, though, to me, is what's happening with China and the U.S. Now, remember, China's President Xi Jinping met with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago recently. Donald Trump's a very transactional guy. China, I think, has kept North Korea going for a long, long time, but recognizes that it is no longer a useful fulcrum against the West and, in fact, dangerous. So I think that between Trump and the Chinese, there is some sort of way that they are trying to work towards bringing that regime down in some sort of way that's not chaotic, that doesn't involve a missile launch, artillery raining down on Seoul.
Can they reform the regime?
They can't reform the regime. The regime needs to be replaced. When they do, they'll have to deal with a lot of nuclear material, probably chemical material as well, and a huge humanitarian crisis. Because remember, North Korea is this weird slave prison state that's completely impoverished, and everybody's been brainwashed. It's not like when the wall fell in Eastern Europe, and everybody on the other side of the wall was happy because they knew that the system that they were living under was a fraud, and they were happy to be liberated. The North Koreans are going to be a lot more like those sort of Japanese soldiers you would find in the jungle in the Philippines still fighting the last war.
And do you think there is any danger to Australia?
Well, there will be. And if that regime isn't changed eventually, and they're allowed to keep developing their missile technology, they will eventually be able to put Darwin in their sights, or Seattle, or Tokyo. Well, they can put Tokyo in their sights now. But, all the countries around there, and we would absolutely be in the frame for that.
Well, part of the Australian larrikin way is to have a bit of a chuckle even on a dire subject like this. One of our viewers has sent in a little scenario that we're going to screen here. We've sent the map to Kim Jong-un in response to his threats to nuke Australia. There you are. We're off the hook. We're off the hook. Hopefully he'll fall for that. And if he doesn't, we might be in a bit of strife. But I think that's a good way. The Australian way is to have a bit of a laugh. The old po-faced lefties hate having a chuckle about anything, but I think that's not a bad bit of humour on which to end this segment. Thanks very much for participating. It's been a wonderful panel. Hopefully you'll come back to Mark Latham's Outsiders in the future. Right now we're going to have, I suppose, an interval for which we're going to then change over to talk to Dane Van Der Neut from the Commercial Fisheries. And while we do that, one of the things everyone's talking about was the amazing Ben Fordham interview on 2GB with Tommy Robertson. Tommy Robertson is this guy who was growing up and lived in Luton in England, and he blew the whistle on the role of radical Islam before anyone else, and talked about the breeding ground in the prison system, the dangers in Luton and the broader social fabric. And Ben Fordham, who was on the program last week, had an amazing interview with Tommy. We're going to listen to that for a few minutes and then come back to talk all about the mistreatment, the government mistreatment of commercial fisheries. Stay tuned and let's listen to Tommy Robertson, a fascinating interview with Ben Fordham.
Tommy Robinson joins us on the line from the UK. Tommy Robinson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ben.
You're very kind for coming on and talking to us. I know you're a busy man. Why do they describe you as Britain's most hated man?
They do that, and in our country and in the Western countries, they've done that to anyone who's critical or speaks out or challenges or points out the negative aspects of Islam. You're called far right, you're called racist, you're called a bigot. They like to put working class people into a box, into a category, in order so that they slander them and people don't listen to them. Now, the fact that people say I'm the most hated man, when I first started talking about these issues years ago, which I've been going back 8-9 years, I started warning and explaining things that were happening in the UK. The reason why I know and understand these things is in my hometown, Al-Mujahideen, which are now a prescribed terrorist organisation, Omar Bakri, Abu Hamza, the Hook Hand, their head office was in my hometown. My hometown was a launch pad for the 7/7 bombings. It was the fertiliser bomb plot, the Stockholm bomber. I know most of these people. I know many Muslims I grew up with and even went to school with have gone to fight for ISIS. So I understood the problems that we're facing. I started talking about sexual exploitation, where large groups of Muslim men are taking young white girls as sexual slaves. They're raping them, pimping them and beating them. But when I started talking about all these issues, you have to understand that it was before Lee Rigby was killed. It was before 7/7 originally. So most people didn't want to hear or didn't really understand. As the years have gone on, everything I warned about and everything I said about, like now it's a known fact in government reports that Pakistani and Muslim men were grooming and raping young girls at an industrial level across our country. The police were ignoring it. The politicians were ignoring it. In fact, there was a conspiracy of silence between all of them to allow it to happen. And the reason for that they were scared of being called racist. That's just how powerful political correctness is. So, yeah, I was warning about it for years. So in the early days, a lot of people didn't want to hear it. we were labelled, and the media done a campaign against us where we were called racist or extremists. Now, as we've moved on through the years, people are now understanding what they were saying was true. And you can go back, people can dig back through my speeches, going back for all the years. For example, Lee Rigby's killer. Before he beheaded Lee Rigby, we made a video about him the year before. All of these different extremists we've warned about, all of them. We've warned about, we've followed them, we've highlighted them. I campaigned locally against an Islamic centre in my town, which is a Wahhabist Salafist centre, and it's just now Khalid Massoud, who was the most recent terrorist in the attacks in London, in Westminster, where he run over loads of people. He was employed by that mosque in Luton. So all the things that we've been warning about, and you can track it back, people can see it. It's like they were right, we were right, and but there's no good feeling in that.
Amazing stuff from Tommy Robinson. We'll have more of that interview later on in our show. And anyone who wants to learn more about Tommy Robinson and his very important work in the United Kingdom, he's joined the Rebel Media Organisation, and the Rebel is on the website there. You can check out Tommy Robinson at any stage. He's a very important guy. But I'm very much pleased that you're here, Dane, to talk about commercial fisheries, because one of the things we want to do on Mark Latham's Outside is give a focus to practical issues in the community, in the economy in particular, that we don't hear in the mainstream media. And you sent me some correspondence to say a statistic that absolutely floored me, and that is that Australia imports 72% of its seafood consumption. Now, you'd think one nation in the world, an island continent like ours with so much fishing potential, would be virtually self-sufficient in this basic element of the Australian diet. What's gone wrong?
Okay, so 72% is the latest figure. However, in December is going to be a scary time because the next report from ABARES comes out, and according to the last report, the imports are rising steadily at 3% per annum.
Wow. And
since that last report, we've had Port Phillip Bay closures to commercial fishing, and we've lost over 400 tonne of seafood that is now inaccessible to the Victorian public. In Queensland, we've had 3 net-free zones introduced.
So what does that mean? What's a net-free zone? You can't go in and fish with your nets?
Yeah, no commercial net fishing.
So it basically means no effective commercial fishing in those. It's only rod fishing?
Yeah.
Right.
So we've lost 1/3 of our wild-caught barramundi from Queensland.
So every year, an extra 3% of exports coming in, and Australian provision of seafood to our people is falling by that amount.
Well, that's the steady amount,
wow.
But I think the increase is going to be scary when these new figures come in, especially in New South Wales. We're going through a reform at the moment, and what's happening there is the active fishermen are having their ability to create wealth, so whether it's their days that they've worked historically or their catch that they've caught historically, that is being taken, turned into a total catch, and it's been shared across all shareholders, including the ones that aren't active. So these active fishers then have to go to the bank, borrow money, and buy their jobs back.
Wow. Now, Malcolm Turnbull talks about jobs and investment. Isn't this an obvious area where government has got a role to play in improving access to the fishing areas, take the restrictions off, give commercial fishers a better go, and we'd create more jobs and investment?
There's no doubt there needs to be some involvement with the federal government. I know there's been a petition that's gone to the federal parliament, and it needs to be acted on, and it's asking for our rights to be recognised in the law, because currently they're not. Seafood consumers have less rights than minority groups of recreational fishers, for instance. Now, with the recreational fishing sector, it's a community. However, you have lobbyists who are claiming to represent that sector, and they're very radical in their views. They spread propaganda about commercial fishing. I've seen pictures that have been 10 years old and not even from the area.
And the environmental lobby, they're doing the same to put these restrictions on?
They're very quiet at the moment, but the issue for recreational fishers, and I've got to plead to the recreational fishers, the genuine ones, you need to be careful about who is representing you. And the reason is these people are advocating for the removal of commercial fishermen regardless of the science. So when the environmental lobby comes in, they're going to say, well, you didn't need science, so see you later.
Now, one of our viewers, Mike Schneider, has written in, about half of our seafood take is exported to where it gets the best price for the fishermen. So he's talking about exports. And he says a lot of our imports are for low-value seafood, such as tinned fish. I think he's referring there to tuna, most of which comes from Thailand, where the local industry has zero interest in competing. How do you respond to Mike?
So first, I respond by saying his figures may be based on one fishery, maybe. Right. The actual statistics, the total production between aquaculture and wild caught in the latest figures is 235,000 tonnes, and the export is sitting around 43,000 tonnes. So 18.2% around there.
Right,
So not 50.
Okay, so his figures aren't accurate, and even if they were, it still indicates Australia's a long way off producing enough seafood that our people could eat.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I looked at your blog material today, which is very impressive, Commercial Fishing Media, that's the website, and you've identified the problems of too much government interference, mismanagement of marine parks, the introduction of the recreation fishing havens only and the net-free zones. What's your call to action to fix this critical problem?
So my call to action is for seafood consumers and even recreational fishers, the genuine ones who want to protect their rights and the seafood consumers' rights to consume our local produce, you need to go to Commercial Fishing Media website, subscribe, and I'll keep you informed, and we will start campaigning for the rights of consumers to be recognised, because above all else, consumers need to be recognised as a key stakeholder in the marine resource, and at the moment they are forgotten.
So you're going to run a big campaign along those lines. Can I just say, I'd like to make my website available. I think part of this operation has got to be to back in organisations like yours to raise awareness, get more people involved, and ensure this is not a question of economic protection, is it? We're not saying that imported fish products shouldn't come into Australia. What we're saying is let the industry compete by getting government regulation and government control off your back. So we want to be supportive of that. So if you're running a big campaign, let us know and we'll put it on our website.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so Dane, have we got good prospects here? Is there anyone in the political system who listens and has got common sense?
I am very pessimistic about politicians at the moment in general. When we had Eddie Obeid come through and introduce
well,
the recreational
he's fishing
haven.
down in Cooma Jail, I think. He's in the pond fishing at Cooma Jail, so Eddie wouldn't have done much, would he?
Oh, yeah. And he hasn't been held accountable for that.
No, really?
I mean, if you ask anyone, what is Eddie Obeid known for? He's not known for the fact that he removed the access of consumers from 33 rivers, lakes and estuaries in New South Wales.
Wow. Well,
in one foul swoop.
A few crimes, not just the ones that have been reported and convicted, other crimes of a policy nature. Dane, thanks for coming in. We'll hear more from your organisation. We're going to stay on this issue and keep telling our viewers and our website readers about it. The website again is www.marklathamsoutsiders.com. Dane can be found at Commercial Fishing Media. Thanks for taking an interest in this. Thanks, Dane, for coming in this evening to talk. We're Mark Latham's Outsiders. You might notice in the background we've got the Bundaberg Club Hotel as part of our scenery, as part of our backing. One of the great outsider watering holes in Queensland. There'd be a few fishermen up at Bundaberg, wouldn't there? We need more.
Yeah, Bundaberg. I'm fairly certain there's a few fishermen there. Mackay, Rockhampton and Cairns are the 3 net-free zones, so support your fishermen there. And just one last thing before we go. Hervey Bay Seafood Festival.
In August.
13th of August, be there.
Yep, very important. We're going to have more of that Tommy Robinson interview with Ben Fordham, quite amazing stuff. Please listen to that, and when we come back, we've got the amazing character Barbara. You've never seen anything like it, truly. We'll be back shortly.
You
after
had a
Tommy
front
Robinson.
row seat to all of this stuff. It was happening in your town. You saw the face of Luton changing. You also saw these gangs developing. And as you watched all of this unfold, you started sounding the alarm. But time and time again, when people heard that alarm, instead of paying attention to it, they focused on the man who was sounding the alarm and saying, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're discriminating, as opposed to thinking, hang on a moment, this man might have a warning here about the safety and security of all of us.
Yeah, and look, at the same time, growing up in a town like Luton, we have, when you talk about the demographical change, we have probably 60,000 Muslims in Luton. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. That's the truth. So I've met some amazing Muslim characters in my life, and I said from the start, my rhetoric has never changed. I've said, look, I'm not against Muslims. I don't say I want Muslims deported from my country. What I'm saying is, I want to stop the influence and the growing spread of Saudi-funded Wahhabist Salafist Islam, which is spreading through our country. It's taken over our country. It's actually everything we spoke about. If you look at the universities, every single institution in the UK, whether it be schools, have now been taken over. It's now been exposed that they were getting governors into schools. They were teaching extremism within the schools across our country. The prison institution is basically an ISIS training camp. The universities, the amount of radical extremists, Hizb ut-Tahrir, I've seen them come up a lot in Australia, that organisation. They have a base in every university in the UK. Now, when I was going through the terrorists that have come out of universities who are ex-members of the University Islamic Society, there's literally about 30 that have gone on and committed terrorism. It's insane. And so every single institution in our country is being used against us. Now, I've spoke out about it. I'm saying we need to do this. We need to do things we've warned about for years, and it's quite frustrating because 5 years later, we now see that the government are talking about setting up different extremism units within the prisons. That's not going to solve it either. It's not big enough. They're talking about putting only 30 radical Muslims in the UK into one of these units. I've been in the prison system. There's 30 on each wing. There's 30 radicals on every wing, and they're radicalising and converting. And my point is, if you have men that are planning, that 6 men were in prison for 30 years, they were planning to kill me. They were caught with guns and bombs and suicide notes. Now, they can't be in prison at any time with car thieves. They can't. These men are enemy combatants. We are in a war, and they have signed up against us. And you're allowing them to use our prison system to radicalise the most vulnerable and weak people in our society.
An amazing interview with Tommy Robinson, and you can get more of that. In fact, you get the whole thing on the 2GB website, and there'll be plenty of podcasting around. It really does need to be listened to in full. We're here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. Don't forget our support page. Kick the can, help us out. We're up against the billion-dollar ABC and other media
And just
giants.
watch those numbers going up as we scroll.
Hang on, Barbara, just a moment. Support.marklathams.com. You've heard the voice of Barbara. This is a world first, isn't it?
Mark,
Your first
my goodness,
time on the screen.
world first on the program. And those numbers are just skyrocketing as we speak.
Welcome, Barbara. You're
Thank you
well
so
known
much.
on the Alan Jones
And may
program.
I just say, I know it's an old story, but you've got such soft hands.
I do. I'm soft heart.
What did John Howard think about that strong handshake? Forget that nonsense. I mean,
He's still
my
recovering.
goodness.
He's still recovering. Now, Barbara, tell us a little bit about yourself. I believe
you
you're
must be using salve or something.
Yeah, plenty of
I
stuff.
use that
Don't
for
worry.
cracked nipples.
Okay, well, I haven't got that problem.
Right.
But, Barbara, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a young lass from country Victoria?
Young lass from country Victoria.
And you like a drop of red wine?
Rosé, be precise,
yeah,
thank you,
okay.
Mark.
You love a tipple, good on you.
Yes, country Victoria. I was sitting there in my little shack there on number 1 Royce Street in Main Street, Wangaratta. And I rang up Alan Jones, and he gave me the biggest break ever. And he said to me after the program, Barbara, darling, you have to move up to Sydney to meet with the likes of you.
Oh, it's
Mark.
a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Absolutely.
And what are we talking about
Well, we're
tonight?
talking about
Come on.
Gillian Trigg. She's won an award for
what
freedom
a
of speech.
Nimrod. You wouldn't have her at any family function.
Well, she wants to listen in at the kitchen table.
Well, of course she does. She's going to benefit from it. Scones and all that sort of thing. Sandwiches.
So you're not a big rap for Gillian. What about your other mate, Waleed Ali?
Oh, my goodness, Waleed Ali, the little Easter bunny. He's a wonderful man, I'm sure, in his own regard, but he's hardly halal, if you know what I mean.
Well, he's got an offsider, you know. I don't know if you've heard about it. Yasmin Abdel Mageed.
Oh, it's such a mouthful.
It is.
Say it again.
Yasmin Abdel Mageed. She's got a few theories out there that
Go on.
Anzac Day, lest we forget, is really about Syria and Palestine.
Syria.
Nauru, Manus.
Palestine. These are desert places, yes?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't associate Anzac Day with those things, would you?
Well,
illegal
we fought on the
immigration, you
front.
wouldn't be a
Well,
big
I
fan of
mean-
the boat people, would you?
Well, I have to say, the boat people, they're rather floating, if you know what I mean.
Well, the problem was that 1,200 of them drowned under the Rudd and Gillard governments. An absolute humanitarian crisis,
Why
a
on
disaster.
earth would you vote for those stupid mongrels
Well,
like
some did.
Rudd and Gillard?
Who's your favourite politician out there, Barbara? Anyone that
Oh,
you...
this is a hard one. You, darling.
No,
I mean, I won't hold the Labor situation against you.
No, thank you.
I mean, we're all here to be converted, you know that.
Converted to what?
To truth. And you're
yes,
such a
absolutely,
great
yeah.
man in regards to truth. And the Labor Party, as far as I'm concerned, my goodness, I mean, you want a stiff drink before you listen to one of them start talking. What's next?
Well, there's plenty of stiff stuff going on. Down in Victoria, the Labor Party's introduced Safe Schools program
Oh,
with
my goodness.
penis tucking and
What
breast
is
bond.
penis tucking?
Well, I think it's an attempt by a young man to look female by, you know, getting the old schlong out of view there, tucked between the legs.
I'm saying
You wouldn't
now,
have seen that in your day, would you?
I'm not in favour of circumcision.
Okay.
But if it's in the public view, upsetting people, you want to tuck it away.
Okay.
So I understand what they're saying.
Really? But you're not a supporter of Dan Andrews?
Of course I am. Well,
He's a-
Daniel
he's a-
Andrews is an old has-been,
He's a lunatic.
Angus breeder. You can, no, chuck him in the river.
Now, in the school system, they're teaching everyone about offence and diversity and hurt feelings. What, do you think society's got a bit out of control here with what we call
Of course they've got out of
offenderati?
control. I mean, they're lazy and they're useless. They're lost and they're forgetful. I mean, they've got nothing to fight for. You think about it. Way back when we had real people like Banjo Patterson and John Laws.
Whatever happened to Lawsy?
I can't remember. But, you know, you had real people who understood the situation. We had something to fight for. Our young people now are so confused. It's all about the sexuality of the individual. Who cares about that? You understood that on your wedding night. You didn't have to go gallivanting around the countryside trying to look for answers to every sexual problem, Mark.
No.
You know that as a Labor politician.
Yeah, I do. And how did you get it on with Banjo Patterson? What sort
Well,
of
I
relationship did you have with Banjo?
I
You
dated his son,
His son or him?
Granjo Patterson. Now let me say, fly the red flag. What about this bloody Hillary Clinton carrying on about she was the reason, the Russians were the reason
Yeah, she's a whinger.
why she lost the election. Fly the red flag. Do you remember that song?
Not well, but probably the only flag Hillary's got left, isn't it?
I know, but I mean, was she going to blame Mars next?
Yeah, the dog ate her homework, I think.
Yeah, the dog ate her
That's
homework.
where she's up to.
And she's going, oh, well, we've got to worry about this and we'll worry about that. And Mark, did she really think that people listen to her?
No,
That's
no,
the
they've
big
had
question.
enough. You lose the election, I know that. After the election loss, they don't listen to you. They just write books about you, shit canning you. So Hillary's got plenty of that coming up. What have you got coming up, Barbara? I hear you're a keen horse breeder and owner.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you give a little
out
tip?
on the field. Winks.
Winks. Winks.
Why would you not want to bet?
Well, that's a good tip. It will win.
Winks. But look, horses are great things, but on the same side of things, I mean, I have to say, it takes a carrot or two to understand the situation.
Okay. What have you got coming up? What are you doing the rest of the week?
I've got to go to Queensland, to the Gold Coast in the next few weeks. My darling Alan, he has projected me to the society, and he said to me, look, you have to go out there and showcase your talents to the wider community.
What, are you going to be a meter maid up there? Get the old
I'm
on?
going
Hit the beach?
I'm going up to the Gold Coast to show the people of Queensland what it means to be quintessentially Australian.
What's that?
Me.
You, okay. Well, Alan loves you. Barbara's on the Alan Jones. Alan loves you.
And
the listeners and viewers
love you. And you've got such soft hands, Mark, my darling.
Soft heart. Soft heart as
Gorgeous
well. So,
man.
Barbara, thanks for coming in. We'll have you again.
Thank you so much,
we'll
and I
have
look
you
forward
again,
to it. And
most
I
people
must say,
do.
I have to say a shout out to Ricky and Ben and all those people who made tonight so wonderful.
Fantastic.
And all the rest can get stuffed.
Absolutely. Now,
bugger them all.
That's it. Thanks, Barbara. And thanks for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We'll be back next Wednesday night, and we're going to leave you with a highlights package from a very special event in Sydney last Thursday. Some of Barbara's friends and relatives were there. It was the launch of a book by Steve Cates about the Trump victory.
And Ross Cameron.
Yes, you know it.
No, wait. Let's talk about Ross Cameron.
No, Ross was there and he spoke really well.
What a gorgeous man he was.
Yeah, you fancy Ross, do you?
I do. I think so tall and handsome. With those deep eyes, so deep that the ocean would be envious.
Well, let's go to Ross and a little bit of my own stuff at the book launch for Steve Cates. Hopefully you enjoy it, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
I heard Aaron Patrick might be here from the AFR. Have we got any journalists here? We'll just see if there's any. Yeah, okay, good. I just want to know. All right, we're on the record. On the record. It's always dangerous. Dangerous. In fact, Mark and I engaged in a kind of competition to see, earlier this year, to see who could push the envelope the hardest, you know. Mark won, right? You know, we're talking a lot about India at the moment, at Dani Cole. I see we've got the AFR here, you know, Australia's major business paper, which campaigns against Australia's biggest industry.
And most industries.
Thanks very much, AFR. Love your support for industry. And we have tonight a competitor event taking place, as Mark so memorably and permanently named them, the US Confusion Centre is holding its event, in which 30 out of 30 professional analysts in a 50-50 bet, like a roulette wheel, red or black, 30 out of 30 landed on the wrong number at the US Confusion Centre. Now, I would say to you, you know, with respect to Aaron Patrick, whom I like, I can't help liking, despite my better instincts, you know, there wasn't a single leading analytical figure at the Australian Financial Review, with the exception of Rowan Dean, the third amigo, who picked the right answer on the biggest question facing the world. So here you've got the US Confusion Centre spending, you know, they've just asked, how much more are they asking for right now? It's like another 15, a cool 15 mil, right, straight out of your back pocket. They earn as a dividend because 30 out of 30 picked the wrong answer on a 50-50 bet. the truth is the US Studies Centre is not studying the culture of the United States, which produced President Donald Trump. They are a kind of charity for progressive left, low intelligence, academics who hang around a taxpayer-funded revenue stream. That is what they are. They are like the vent dwellers, at the early stage of human life, who figured out how to get a form of existence that didn't require light. That is what they are. And it has bad consequences for Australia. So here you've got, Gladys baby. Actually, I need to be careful I don't get sacked as well. I'm just going to wind this back a little bit. Ptolemy was a contemporary of Marcus Aurelius, not the Ptolemy who, you give me a time bell there, you've flown all the way from Victoria, now tell me to shut up. You wouldn't be the first, I can promise you. I believe Martin Parkinson, Brendan Nelson used to wear an earring. I believe Martin Parkinson should wear a nose ring. Okay, I believe he should go to work with a big bone through the bridge of his nose to let everyone know that intellectually he is a primitive savage. And I don't mind a guy being sort of deeply insecure and having a need to control things and wanting to take the world back more than 2,000 years to a pre-Ptolemaic savagery, but I just don't think we should make him the head of the Prime Minister's Department. That's my view, right?
So, hi guys, I work for Fairfax Media, and I've written 2 books on Australian politics. Enjoyed your speeches. The problem with you outsiders is that you're too far outside, is that you don't compromise, and there is no question. The problem is that you pursue issues which will help Australians. You pursue lower taxes, deregulation, individual freedoms, issues that millions of Australians would agree with. The problem is that you marginalise yourselves by an obsession with climate change. Now, there is a perception in the community science is settled. But there is a perception in the community. And that's the problem. It is. So by pursuing it so hard, is that millions of Australians will not take you seriously. And I think it's the same thing with gay rights. I think you should champion gay rights, okay, because you're seen as xenophobic. So there is no question. I'm not making a question. I'm breaking the rules here, because you guys had to go to Fairfax, so I think I'm entitled to express my own views. I'm saying, narrow your message to ones which will have a broader appeal, and I think you'll have more impact.
Well, we admire your freedom of speech, and this is small fish here, isn't it? But it's reminiscent of those Trump rallies where there'd be hundreds of journalists lined up at the back, and Trump would say, "They are the most dishonest, disgusting people I've ever known," and the mob would roar and turn on them to the point where some of them would then come whinging like snowflakes onto their cable TV shows and say, "I think our lives are in danger at these rallies." But no such thing will happen to you, Aaron. I think Ross's mention of the Financial Review and half-demonisation of you is a great reminder of how Trump did it.
The only point I would make, Aaron, as I'm open, is that I regard climate change from considered reflection, according to the lights that guide me, according to the data available to me, according to the capacities and limitations of my own mind, which I admit is flawed, I regard climate change as complete unadulterated bullshit. The point I want to make to you is that the question is what I believe is not the important thing in terms of your question is what is in our interest as a movement. And I think the data, including from the ABC, from last year, in which is rarely ever tested, the key questions are rarely ever tested or reliably tested. I mean, the extent to which I would rely on a Fairfax poll in relation to community sentiment on gay marriage, okay, I would rely on it as far as I could physically throw George Christensen after 4 or 5 beers, right? I think you guys are not trustworthy to measure public sentiment on an issue like that in the same way that the Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Energy under Barack Obama has come out to Mary Kissel at the New York Times in the last 48 hours and admitted that the data being generated by Barack Obama's energy and environment departments in relation to climate change was complete bullshit. That's his testimony as a 4-year official in Barack Obama's own Department of Climate Change. He said we were systematically fudging the data. I'm open to your argument about, what the strategic view is. I know that the Australian Financial Review's Weekend magazine regarded the sexual preferences of 50 of Australia's leading CEOs and commercial actors as kind of more important than their contribution to the bottom line of the investors who own the company. That is not my view. I think you guys are obsessed with sexuality. I think you can barely publish a news article without getting sexuality into it somewhere. And frankly, the reason why I go to China for a week is to have a holiday from your fucking obsession with sexuality.
I shouldn't even try to say anything after that. And the big issue about same-sex marriage, well, if you had a vote on the 8th of February, it would have been carried. But we've got to the ridiculous stage where the leader of the opposition, Bill Shorten, says we can't have the vote because people are suicide. Democracy. The campaigns would be so harsh, gay people will jump off the gap or kill themselves because of a little bit of democracy. The sickness is not in the people that Shorten sneers at. The sickness is between Shorten's ears. To make that judgment about the Australian people is just plain wrong, and a sickness in our democracy. These things get worked out the Australian way. We don't need cultural dietitians telling us what to think about all these things. The Australian way has been to treat people on merit, and the Australian pushback will come, and I say this from a Labor Party background, that we're losing meritocracy. We're not judging people on their merits. We're going down this identity path, which is primitive and barbaric, of judging people by how they look. I've always thought Trump on trade needs to be understood as, in other areas, as a problem solver. Like Ross has done a great service for us in constantly bringing attention to the art of the deal. And Trump is a problem solver, and a lot of his rhetoric is very much refreshing because he'll talk about North Korea. We're going to solve that problem. You see, the conventional wisdom in the Obama administration was that the way to deal with a problem was to pretend that it might disappear. But Trump fronts up to the problems and sees himself very much as a pragmatist, as someone who can deal with these things in an empirical way, look at the evidence and act on it. And the trade issue really has given the United States 2 pebbles in their shoe. They've got a big trade deficit with China, they've got a big trade deficit with Mexico, and their only other trading partner that matters is Canada. So he wants to do something about NAFTA, he wants to do something about the Chinese trade deficit, nothing else really matters. He's not interested in some global trade war. So I think he'll deal with that as a problem solver. So I like that. I think the old ideological approach or the pretend it might disappear approach has failed in the past, and he'll get a lot of support just by dealing with these things one by one, to look at the evidence, to judge it rationally, and to prove time after time that he's pretty smart. Even on one area where it might be thought he failed, that's healthcare and getting rid of Obamacare. Maybe he thought that the biggest pain in the arse by far in that election campaign inside the Republican tent was Paul Ryan, the ultimate sunshine conservative. What? I became fascinated with Trump because he was so anti-establishment. And it occurred to me probably at the beginning of last year that Trump, in his anti-mainstream media rhetoric, in his anti-foreign policy rhetoric, in his anti-Washington establishment rhetoric, and his general love of women, he would have had a ready-made place at the Green Valley branch of the Labor Party when I joined it in 1979. We wouldn't have fancied a billionaire. We would have thought he was way too rich. But for fighting the media, who we hated their guts, for fighting the foreign policy establishment, who we despised, for fighting the political establishment, this was someone railing against the elites in a way that working class people used to do. So it's a bit of a paradox that he's so wealthy. But we'll put that aside. And the fact that he loves beautiful women, well, what's more Australian male than that? And, he had all these attributes, you see. So I became fascinated by this anti-establishment approach. And the person who was just such a constant nuisance with it was Paul Ryan. So what does he do? He says, well, let Paul Ryan put up the health bill. Let's see how it goes. And of course, the poor foolish idiot falls over, embarrasses himself, and now Trump eventually will get something through. He gets his own mandate on that and deals with the ultimate sunshine conservative, essentially by throwing some sunshine right up his clucker.